Picture this: a single, weathered oak tree standing sentinel at the edge of a sprawling garden, its gnarled branches reaching out like they're trying to tell a story no one's ever bothered to hear. That's the first thing I see every morning when I pull back the curtains in our old bedroom. I'm Valerie, 50 years old, and I've lived in this quaint, creaky house for more than half my life, sharing every groan of its wooden floors with my husband, Edward. Our home is a patchwork of time, faded floral wallpaper peeling at the edges in the living room, windows that rattle in the slightest breeze, and a staircase that sings its own tune with every step. But it's ours, a quiet testament to the 25 years we've built together, brick by brick, memory by memory. Out back, beyond the chipped paint of our porch, lies Edward's sanctuary, the garden. It's a world of its own, bursting with rose bushes that flare crimson and pink against the green, their scent drifting through the open windows on warm days like a whispered secret. The hedges are trimmed with a precision that used to be Edward's signature, each leaf in its place, a living canvas of his patience and care. That garden was his pride, his joy, the place where he'd spend hours on his knees, coaxing life from the soil with hands that knew every inch of this earth. I can still see him out there in my mind, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his glove, grinning at me through the kitchen window as I waved a mug of coffee in his direction. But that was before the back injury, before the pain stole his strength and left him leaning on a cane. The tap, tap, tap of it on the hardwood a constant reminder of what he's lost. These days, he sits in his armchair by the window, gazing out at the blooms with a quiet ache in his eyes. It was a hard decision, but we knew we couldn't let the garden wither. So, we hired Elliot. He's just 21, a young man with a stillness about him that feels almost out of place in someone so young. The first time I saw him, standing at our gate with a pair of shears slung over his shoulder, I noticed how tall he was, how his tanned skin seemed to carry the sun itself, and how his hands were always dusted with soil, as if he'd been born from the dirt and never quite left it. He doesn't say much, barely a nod when I offer him a glass of water. But there's a grace to the way he works, a quiet mastery as he shapes the hedges and tends to the roses with a focus that feels almost reverent. I couldn't help but watch him that first day, marveling at how he seemed to understand the garden in a way even Edward never did. Like he could hear its whispers and answer in kind. Life with Edward has always been steady, a rhythm of routines that have carried us through the decades. Mornings start with the clink of coffee mugs and the soft hum of the radio in the kitchen, but lately, my gaze keeps drifting out the window to where Elliot is already at work. I find myself standing there longer than I mean to, watching him kneel by the rose bushes, the midday sun beating down on his broad shoulders. His white shirt clings to his back, damp with sweat, outlining every muscle as he moves with a kind of quiet purpose. His fingers, rough and calloused, handle the pruning shears with such care, snipping away dead leaves with a tenderness that feels almost intimate, like he's not just tending to plants, but to something deeper, something alive. I catch myself staring at the way the light catches in his dark hair, and I have to shake my head, remind myself I'm just appreciating his skill, nothing more. I remember the first time I worked up the nerve to approach him, a glass of lemonade in my hand, the condensation dripping down my fingers as I walked across the lawn. It was one of those sweltering afternoons where the air felt thick, heavy with the scent of blooming flowers. He was crouched near the edge of the garden, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, when I held out the glass. He looked up, those dark eyes of his meeting mine for just a heartbeat, and I felt this strange flutter in my chest, like a bird trapped behind my ribs. He took the glass with a faint nod, the barest hint of a smile tugging at his lips, and muttered a low thanks before turning back to his work. That was it, just a moment. But I walked back to the house feeling like something had shifted, even if I couldn't name it. I told myself it was nothing, just admiration for how he's brought the garden back to life, how he's keeping Edward's dream alive when Edward can't. Speaking of Edward, it breaks my heart to see him now, settled in that worn-out armchair by the living room window, his cane resting against the armrest. He spends hours there, staring out at the garden with this faraway look, a mix of longing and frustration etched into every line of his face. He used to be out there every day, hands deep in the soil, but now his back won't let him do much more than shuffle to the kitchen and back. I see the way his fingers twitch sometimes, like they're itching to hold a trowel again, to feel the earth give under his touch. It's a quiet kind of pain, the kind that doesn't need words, and I feel it too every time I catch that look in his eyes. Our evenings are simple, almost too predictable. After dinner, we sit together in the dim glow of the living room lamp, the TV murmuring in the background while Edward asks about the garden's progress. I tell him what I've noticed, how Elliot reshaped the hedge near the fence, or how the roses seem to bloom brighter under his care. Edward nods, a small smile flickering across his. There's a morning I can't shake from my mind, a moment that changed everything. I woke up to the sun already climbing high, its golden light spilling through the kitchen window as I filled a glass of water for Elliot. The glass was cool in my hand, beads of condensation slipping down the sides, catching the sunlight in tiny, fleeting prisms that danced across the counter. Stepping outside, the heat of the day was already pressing down, heavy and unyielding, wrapping around me like a thick blanket. The air carried the scent of freshly turned earth, raw and alive, mingling with the sweet perfume of the roses. I walked across the lawn, my sandals crunching on the dry grass, until I reached Elliot near the far edge of the garden. He was bent over a bush, his hands moving with that same quiet precision I'd come to notice. I held out the glass, and as he took it, his fingers brushed against mine, lingering just a second too long. A jolt shot through me, sharp and electric, like a current I hadn't felt in years. My breath caught, and I looked into his eyes, those deep, unreadable pools, and he whispered, "Your roses are special. They bloom best when someone returns to them after a long absence." His voice was low, almost a murmur, but his gaze pierced right through me, as if he could see something I'd buried deep, something I didn't even dare name. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding against my ribs, unsure of what he meant, but feeling the weight of his words settle into me like a seed, planting a forbidden curiosity I couldn't uproot. Over the next few days, something shifted between us, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. It was in the small glances we exchanged when I'd bring him a drink or ask about a particular plant. His eyes catching mine for a beat longer than necessary, a flicker of something unspoken passing between us. It was in the accidental touches, like when our hands grazed while he pointed out a wilting leaf, his skin warm and rough against mine, sending a shiver up my arm despite the heat of the day. And it was in the silences, those heavy, charged pauses when neither of us spoke, yet the air seemed to hum with things we wouldn't say. I'd find myself lingering near him, pretending to inspect the garden, but really, I was drawn to his presence, to the way he seemed to carry a quiet storm within him. I'd catch myself wondering about him, about what lay behind that stillness, and then I'd push the thoughts away, ashamed of where my mind wandered. But the pull was there, growing stronger each day, a current I couldn't swim against no matter how hard I tried. Then it happened. I don't know how I let it, but I did. It was late afternoon, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the garden. We were near the rose bushes, by the old weathered bench Edward and I had painted together years ago, its once bright blue now chipped and faded, a relic of happier, simpler times. I'd been helping Elliot clear some overgrowth, or at least that's what I told myself, when suddenly, the space between us felt too small, too warm. I don't remember who moved first, but in a moment of weakness, I betrayed Edward right there among the roses. It was raw, intense, like a dam breaking after years of holding back. Elliot's attentiveness overwhelmed me. His hands, his focus, the way he seemed to see me, really see me, in a way I hadn't felt in so long. My body responded without thought, ignoring age, ignoring consequence, just breathing in the forbidden. Time seemed to stop, the world narrowing to the scent of roses, the heat of his breath, the roughness of the bench beneath me. I felt alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible, every nerve on fire, every heartbeat a drum in my chest. But as quickly as the exhilaration came, so did the guilt, crashing over me like a cold wave. The thorns of the roses pricked my skin as I shifted, tiny stabs of pain that felt like accusations, reminders of my sin. I pulled away as I stood there in the garden, the weight of what I'd done pressed down on me like a physical force, making my chest tight and my breath shallow. I straightened my blouse with shaky fingers, smoothing out wrinkles that weren't even there, as if I could somehow iron out the mess I'd made of my life in that single, reckless moment. My hands were still dusted with dirt from the overgrowth we'd been clearing, and I brushed at them frantically, trying to wipe away the evidence, though I knew it wasn't the soil that stained me. I couldn't bring myself to look at Elliot, couldn't face whatever expression might be in those dark eyes of his. Out of the corner of my vision, I saw him stand, adjust his shirt, and silently return to his work, picking up his shears as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. The sound of the blades snipping through branches was the only noise between us, sharp and rhythmic, cutting through the suffocating stillness. I turned away, my legs feeling like they might give out beneath me, and started the long walk back to the house. Each step across the lawn felt heavier than the last, the grass crunching underfoot like a judgment with every stride. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, a relentless drumbeat of fear and shame that drowned out the distant chirp of birds. As I neared the porch, my eyes flicked up to the living room window, and a chill ran through me. The curtains, which had been open earlier, were now drawn shut, the faded fabric pulled tight like a barrier. My stomach dropped. Edward must have seen. He must have been watching. The thought made my skin prickle with dread, and I quickened my pace, desperate to get inside. Though I had no idea what I'd say or do once I was there. Pushing open the back door, the familiar creak of the hinges sounded louder than ever, like an alarm announcing my guilt. The kitchen was dim, the late afternoon light barely filtering through the small window above the sink. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me with a soft click, and made my way toward the living room, my sandals scuffing against the worn linoleum. Every sound felt amplified, every movement a betrayal of the normalcy I was trying to cling to. When I reached the doorway, I saw him, Edward, sitting in his armchair as always, his back to me, his silhouette framed against the drawn curtains. He wasn't looking out at the garden now. His head was tilted slightly, his gaze fixed on the wall, as if he could see something there that I couldn't. His face was unreadable from where I stood, but the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the armrests, told me everything I needed to know. He knew, or at least he suspected. The silence in the room was suffocating, thicker than the humid air outside, pressing against me until I felt like I couldn't breathe. I forced myself to move, to act as if everything was fine, though my insides were twisting into knots. "I'll make some tea," I mumbled, my voice coming out thinner than I intended, almost a whisper. He didn't respond, didn't even turn his head, and I shuffled past him toward the kitchen, feeling his unseen eyes boring into me. My hands trembled as I reached for the kettle, the metal cold against my clammy skin, and I nearly dropped it as I filled it with water from the tap. The stream hissed into the empty basin, a sound that seemed to echo in the quiet house, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. Every small task felt monumental, every action a lie. I set the kettle on the stove, the click of the burner igniting like a gunshot in my ears, and I stood there, staring at the blue flame, willing myself to hold it together. "Do you need anything?" I called out, my voice cracking on the last word as I turned back toward the living room. Still, no answer. Just that oppressive silence, broken only by the faint hum of the kettle starting to heat. I moved back to the doorway, hovering there like a ghost, unsure whether to step fully into the room or retreat back to the safety of the kitchen. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I had to face him, had to confront whatever was coming, even if it shattered everything. With a deep breath that did little to steady my nerves, I walked toward the staircase, my hand brushing against the worn banister as I climbed the steps to our bedroom. I needed a moment to gather myself, to figure out how to even begin this conversation, if there was one to be had. The creak of each step echoed in the stillness, a slow, mournful sound that matched the dread pooling in my chest. When I reached the top, I pushed open the door to our bedroom, the familiar space greeting me with a quiet that felt both comforting and accusing. The dim light from the bedside lamp spilled across the room, casting long, uneven shadows on the walls, turning the faded floral pattern of the wallpaper into ghostly shapes that seemed to shift and watch me. The quilt on our bed lay slightly rumpled, its patchwork of blues and yellows a remnant of brighter days. A gift from Edward's mother when we first married. I could still smell the faint trace of lavender from the sachet tucked away in the dresser drawer, a scent that used to soothe me, but now felt like a mockery of the peace I'd lost. I stood there for a moment, my hand still on the doorknob, feeling the weight of the room press against me, every corner holding a memory of the life we'd built, now tainted by what I'd done. I heard the slow tap-tap-tap of Edward's cane on the stairs behind me, each sound deliberate, heavy with purpose. My heart lurched, and I turned just as he reached the doorway, his frame filling the space, his face still unreadable in the half-light. He didn't come in right away. He just stood there, leaning slightly on his cane, his eyes scanning the room before settling on me. Then, without a word, he moved past me, his steps slow but steady, and sat on the edge of the bed, his back to me at first. The mattress dipped under his weight, the springs giving a faint groan, and I watched the curve of his shoulders, the way they seemed to carry a burden far heavier than his physical pain. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but my throat felt like it was closing up, the words trapped behind a wall of shame. He turned then, slowly, his face catching the soft glow of the lamp, and I saw his eyes, hollow, yet piercing, like they could see straight through to the marrow of my guilt. They weren't filled with the anger I'd expected, the rage I probably deserved. Instead, there was something else, something worse, a deep, aching resignation that cut me deeper than any shout ever could. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he spoke, his voice low and rough, each word deliberate, like he'd been turning them over in his mind for hours. "You were blooming, Valerie. Like those roses." I couldn't stop it. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, hot and sudden, and I blinked hard to keep them from falling. But they came anyway, sliding down my cheeks in silent, shameful tracks. I opened my mouth to respond, to deny it, to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but nothing came out. My lips moved soundlessly, my hands clenching into fists at my sides as I stood there, rooted to the spot, drowning in the weight of his gaze and the truth of what he'd said. blooming. That word, it echoed in my mind, a cruel mirror of what Elliot had said about the roses, about returning after a long absence. It felt like Edward had plucked that moment from my memory, twisted it into something raw and painful, and laid it bare between us. A twisted acknowledgement of my betrayal, not just of our marriage, but of everything we'd ever been to each other. The silence that followed was heavier than any I had ever known. A chasm between us that no words could bridge. In the days after Edward's haunting statement, our home became a mausoleum of unspoken truths. We moved through the rooms like ghosts, our interactions reduced to the barest necessities, discussing what to cook for dinner, reminding each other about the utility bill, commenting on the chance of rain tomorrow. Each word felt like a pebble dropped into a still pond, rippling out but never reaching the depths of what truly lay beneath. The creak of the floorboards, the clink of dishes in the sink, the distant hum of the world outside. All of it seemed to mock the silence that had settled over us, a silence so thick it felt like it could choke me if I lingered in it too long. The garden, though, remained unchanged, a silent witness to the fracture I'd caused. From the kitchen window, I'd catch glimpses of it, the roses still blazing with color, their petals unfurling as if nothing had happened, as if my world hadn't crumbled in their midst. I couldn't help but stare at them, day after day, their beauty both a comfort and a curse. They seemed to bloom brighter now, more vibrant than ever, their crimson and pink hues almost defiant against the grayness that had seeped into my life. Were they mocking me, taunting me with the memory of that forbidden moment? Or were they celebrating it, reveling in the chaos I'd unleashed? I couldn't decide, and that uncertainty gnawed at me, a constant itch I couldn't scratch. One afternoon, I found myself at the window again, my hands pressed against the cool glass, my breath fogging it slightly as I watched Elliot out there among the bushes. He moved with the same quiet precision, his broad shoulders bent over a cluster of blooms, his hands deftly trimming away dead leaves. But now, watching him, I felt a storm of emotions I couldn't untangle. Longing, yes, that undeniable pull that still lingered in my chest, but also a deep, aching guilt that coated every thought like a bitter film. I'd changed everything with that one reckless act, shattered the fragile balance of my life with Edward, and yet, as I stood there, I couldn't lie to myself. I liked what had happened with Elliot. I liked the way it made me feel, seen, desired, alive in a way I hadn't been in years, and I didn't regret it, not fully, even as I saw the pain etched into Edward's face every day. That realization was a jagged edge in my mind, cutting deeper each time I turned it over. How could I feel this way? How could I stand here, torn between shame and a strange, defiant satisfaction, knowing I'd fractured the very foundation of my marriage? The days dragged on, each one a mirror of the last, until one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of amber and violet, I saw Edward sitting by the living room window. He'd taken to sitting there more often now, his armchair pulled close to the glass, his cane resting against the armrest like a silent companion. He stared out at the garden, his face a mask of distant thought, his eyes tracing the lines of the hedges and the bursts of color from the rose bushes. I stood in the doorway, unnoticed, watching him as he watched the world outside. What was he seeing out there? Was he imagining the garden as it once was, a place of shared labor and quiet joy, where we'd kneel side by side, dirt under our nails, laughing over some small victory of a new bloom? Or was he seeing it anew, through the lens of my betrayal, every petal and thorn now tainted by what he knew or suspected? I couldn't tell, and that uncertainty clawed at me. A silent question I was too afraid to ask. I stayed there for a long time, hidden in the shadow of the doorway. my hands clasped tightly in front of me, my heart a heavy weight in my chest. The air in the house felt stale, oppressive, as if it carried the weight of every unspoken word between us. Outside, the garden seemed to glow in the fading light, a world apart, a place where I could finally breathe and let go of the burdens that had kept me anchored in silence for so long. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.